So Martin, digital is quite a buzzword today in business, but it means many things to many different people. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you in the context of business?
Well, if you look at it in the context of our business, it probably means, five things. It's what we refer to as the five-legged stool of Google. I mean, you'd start off in desktop search, then you'd migrate to display, video, social and mobile. So there are those five things. So that's the literal explanation. The philosophical explanation, if there is one, if you were trying to describe what Sergey and Larry were basically about, or Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg or others, I mean, they're basically in the disintermediation business. At the end of the day, they're trying to provide, I think, products and services for you as consumers at cheaper prices. So they're basically squeezing the supply chain and disintermediating or disrupting established businesses. And they disrupt them broadly, and I'm talking about not Google or Facebook, but generally. They disrupt them in three ways. Firstly, they disrupt or disintermediate the traditional business model. Secondly, they're evaluated it by VCs and investors in totally different ways who look at the top line or the potential top line, because sometimes these companies don't have revenues to speak of. They don't look at margins or cash flow, which they do in the case of us, or if PwC was public, PwC. And last but not least, they are very attractive destinations for talent. So talent is absorbed or attracted into these new, buzzy, less bureaucratic, more technological operations. So digital means there's something extremely literal. It's now 36% of our business. The industry weighting is about 20%. In other words, clients invest about 20% of budgets on digital. So we're about twice the market weight. But we also know that consumers spend, for example, Mary Meeker estimates in the US about 45% of their time online or with mobile. So therefore, although the industry has moved to 20% and we're at 36%, we're still both underweight, even though we're double the market.
How has WPP embraced digital? What have been the key changes?
Well, I think, I don't know about key changes. The key things, I was at a retail symposium this morning and a sort of similar question. And I had some people in our company at the store, which is our retail consultancy business, basically. And I said, they had three things for me, and I thought about it as I was going there in the car, and I think the first and most important thing is sort of attitudinal. I mean, you've got to get people out of the legacy habits, and why is it that the industry is at 20% and consumers are at 45%? That doesn't make any sense at all. Part of it is because we still overinvest in newspapers and magazines, the felling trees and distributing newsprint, and the other is we haven't invested enough in internet and mobile. So attitude is terribly important. So you have to sort of galvanize if that's the right way, and you have to encourage people to do cannibalistic things. The old saying about if you don't eat your children, somebody else might. That was certainly the case in 2001, 2002. There was a big discussion about newspapers, for example, having digital newspapers, because if they didn't, somebody would come along and attack traditional newspapers in that way. So attitude is terribly important. I would say understanding the importance of data, which is out of our 19 billion, or actually if you include our associates, $21 billion of revenue last year. 5 billion is Kantar, which is what we call data investment management. And that's clients coming to us for consumer insight. And so understanding data in a digital world is critically important, because all those five areas that I mentioned give you unique insights in consumer behavior with the data that they generate. And then I would say the third thing that's really important is experimentation. So, at the moment, for example, we have an investment in Vice.com, which is the subject of a lot of interest. It was an investment we made many, many years ago at quite a small level. Then News Corp came in subsequently at a higher level, and of course now people are talking about Time Warner and others having a look at it at a wholly different level. So if you think about a similar situation with Fullscreen, where there are at least 2 or 3 people looking at that. So it's investing, and early examples of that would be our investment in Omniture, which was web analytics, which Adobe absorbed. in my view, too early. And then Buddy Media, which Salesforce.com absorbed, again, too early from our purposes, because these are training vehicles. So I would say experimenting as a sort of strategic VC, not somebody who's necessarily interested in churning the investment or selling the investment in a short period of time, whether it be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But we are strategic, and we will pay higher prices and higher entry premia for companies that we think will help us strategically, training our people, like the case of web analytics and Facebook, and developing our people, and of course, obviously, developing an understanding of the area. So I would say attitude, data, and then a willingness to experiment. I mean, I think a strategic PE, or it's more actually strategic VC. I mean, historically, we focus more on late-stage investments, but we've now set up WPP Ventures on the West Coast with one of the principals of AKQA. Tom Bedecarrier is leading that, and we're making early-stage investments as well. But you have to experiment, and there's no. I mean, for example, better just treat it in a abstract fashion. But I had lunch with a client today who was talking about a very successful online operation, which was undermining, disrupting, or disintermediating their business. And we were talking about it, and I said, if I had seen that at Allen & Company, that company in Sun Valley, on these elevator pitches they do on the Saturday morning of Sun Valley, where I'd seen that company 4 or 5 years ago. It doesn't affect us, but it affects this particular industry. And my view was that he should have made an investment in that company or something like it. So you have to experiment.
So Martin, you've talked about the need to experiment. How do you manage to do that in a world where you are reporting on a quarterly basis?
Well, with difficulty is the answer, but our business is a fairly rapid payoff business because the investment we make is in human capital. So of the $19 billion or $21 billion of revenue, there's about 12 billion that's being invested in people. And just to show you how paltry the capital investment is, we only invest about $450 million and the net capital investment is very small when you take off the depreciation flow. So we're a human capital investment business, so the payoffs on human capital are very short term, in the sense that if you'll know whether somebody's going to work or not within. It's very rare they're slow burns. I mean, within. They come in, a lot of them come in with what I call the Jesus Christ or Holy Moses aura over them. They are the hero or heroine who's going to change a bad dynamic or further improve a good dynamic, and within 3 months or 6 months, they're not the flavor du jour anymore. But the simple fact is that we invest in people, and the payoffs on people are fairly rapid. You know where you are. So the fact that we're reporting quarterly is not that much of an issue. I would say the quarterly reporting encourages you to do more capital transactions. By that I mean that it makes the option of acquisition more attractive than building, which I think is a mistake, right? But so what we would tend to do is, in most of these cases, when I'm saying experiment, we would tend to buy rather than build, because building is a drag on your P&L. And in fact, I've had clients actually say to me, would I go and talk to senior management? There have been 3 occasions, because they think they can't get their financial function to understand that from a cash flow point of view, building is better than going out and paying massive premiums for internet companies, and particularly with internet companies. And one other thing, in an era of cheap money, we borrowed 30-year money at 5.6% gross last year, and we could do it today at 5.1%, which is 3% net or thereabouts. So you can buy a company at 33 times earnings and not feel the heat, at least in theory. In an era of cheap money, which won't last forever, but particularly now, price multiples are being bid up. One company we saw just recently in the last 24 hours, which is in what I would call a very mundane area, which years ago I think we would probably pay 5 times EBITDA, or 6 times, or 7 times, or maybe even 8 times, went at 12.5, 13.5 times, with 2 PE companies selling one to the other. So it's sardines for buying and selling, not for eating. So, the world is a very strange place.
And where you are placing the bets, particularly inorganically, as you say, to avoid the drag on the P&L, Have you had to create a culture of being able to kill off quickly if it isn't working?
Well, acquisition is interesting. I said yesterday when we were talking about some opportunities in WPP at our board meeting, in our business, because of the nature of the investment, if something isn't working, it's not necessarily because, and in most cases, almost all cases, not because the business is bad, because we're in actually quite a good area which is growing. I mean, if I look at the last 28 years WPP has been in existence, we've just had 3 recessions, 91-2, 2001-2, and 2009. So out of 28 years, it's not actually 5 years, but let's say it's 3 or 4 years, where the nominal spending in the industry and our like-for-like has been negative. So it really is quite interesting. So we're in the right place, and it's a service business is very difficult to fix. Now, and you fix it by not putting a for sale sign over it, you fix it by changing the management, because the management's not good enough. Because it's amazing. I mean, it sounds trite to say it, but if you get the right person in the right place, it all works. Okay, and that's what you basically have to do. Now, as you move more and more into technology, obviously, if the technology is a disaster, you would cut it. You would just take your lumps and move on. But in our, we're not really in the technology business. We're in the application of technology business. We apply technology like Xaxis, which is our digital media planning and buying operation, is really the application of other people's technology. And so, we can't hope to compete with Google at 400 billion in market cap when we're at close to 30. I mean, I wish we were 400 billion, but we can't do that. So, an Alibaba will go public in a few weeks' time at probably around a $200 billion valuation. So there are some big mothers out there. Apple may look as though it's the most valuable company in the world, but probably Google, you strip out the cash, Google probably has got better enterprise value or market value. So I think it's unusual for us to sort of cut it quick. The other thing about people generally is they never take unpleasant action quickly. So I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I mean, you don't like to admit you made a mistake, but more importantly, you don't like to do unpleasant things. Nobody likes to do unpleasant things. And shutting stuff down is unpleasant. And you always give people, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, too much time. I mean, even if intuitively you feel it's wrong, you always delay the evil day.
As WPP embraced digital, it's become a more central aspect of your business and what you offer to your clients. Have you started to look for different characteristics in the people that are driving your business?
Well, naturally you must. I mean, if the business was 0 digital in 2000, and we had 0 people who could speak code, if I can put it like, because it is a language, it should be compulsory in schools. Not compulsory in schools. Maybe it should be even compulsory in schools, but certainly optional. So just like the ideal student would be somebody who was speaking Mandarin and code. So obviously, if you don't have people who code, you don't have software engineers, and which we had some in 2000, you've got to have more of those. That doesn't mean that you can build giant server farms just like Google, or just hire people willy-nilly from Berkeley or MIT or Stanford or Harvard or whatever. But we are hiring more of those people, software engineers, people who do understand these new scientific languages and do understand the application of technology and are data miners. But essentially we have very different people, not massively in our operation, because remember, digital is 36% of the business. But the type of people that we are attracted to, or we want to target from universities or arts and design schools, are quite different in many respects from who they were before. Not just from a technological point of view, but from a geographic point of view as well. Because the US and the UK are not the only markets anymore. They happen to be our 2 biggest markets at 9 billion out of 21 billion. But China is our 3rd largest market. And Brazil is a very big market for us, about 800 million, China being 1.4 billion, Russia is 300 million, and India is 500 million. So these are markets that are becoming more and more important.
A lot of people make the link from a digital world to one where innovation has to thrive and organisations need to be constantly innovating, and the role of creativity is important. Yeah. But those creative skill sets within WPP today, are they different from what they were in 2000?
Yeah, I mean they are, because they well, there's a big debate as to whether the medium's more important than the message, or the message more important than the medium, and I would probably lean to at least the medium and the message are equal, possibly even lean over to say that the medium determines the message. So the nature of the people that we have are very different, and the word creativity, when we go to Cannes, as we did last week, in 2000, we would have been very snotty about it, and we would have said it just resides in the creative departments of big advertising agencies. Now it's much broader. I mean, healthcare, on the weekend before Cannes, they were testing whether healthcare should be part of it, and next year it will be. And then we're also going to have data visualization, so creativity in the broader sense. Even finance directors, believe it or not, can be creative. Sometimes they're too creative, but they can be creative too. So we have this old-fashioned, or certainly in 2000, in my view, we had a old-fashioned view of what creativity was. Now, you look at Cannes, and you look at our industry as a whole, it's now been broadened very much. Now, we still call the trade magazines Ad Age and Ad Week, which makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, maybe Marketing Week is better, and maybe even Campaign is better, because it suggests that campaigns which can be digital as well as analog. But life has changed, and the tech revolution and Moore's law. There's a Moore's law of sort of adaptation. I mean, going back to the industry is at 20%, consumers are at 45%, and we're at 36%. Our target is to get to 40 to 45% of digital within 5 years. By the time we get there, it's probable it's moved on again. And there's a sort of Moore's law of adoption. So getting from 20 to where we are at 35% for the industry, or even to 40 to 45, is going to happen faster than people think, because if you think about it this way, that the people graduating from American university today still haven't quite lived, but almost have lived with the internet from the day they pop their head out of the womb. It means their attitudes and the way they think about things are going to be very different when they assume positions of power, of control, uncontrolled and influence, which they probably will do in a shorter period of time. So their attitudes, so it will accelerate. Okay. The adoption will accelerate.
And as this creativity, or the capability to be creative, exists more broadly in WPP rather than just in the creative department, are you empowering more?
The organisation, should be more flat. So we write a turgid annual report, which is a sort of poor man's Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway report we try to imitate for 28 years. And in that report, we identify 10 trends that we think make us bullish about our industry. One of them has always been that companies will become more centralized, but more agile and more networked and more responsive, more localized, because we operate in 110 countries. Coca-Cola, for example, operates in 220 countries, twice that number. I didn't even think there were 220 countries in the world. How can you know, sitting in London or New York like us, or Atlanta like Coke does, what goes on in 110 or even 220 countries? They have to have more local thought. And what we've noticed is that I can think of at least four examples, and Coke actually is not one of them, where the CEOs are moving to a much more agile, well-resourced but agile and networked and technologically proficient centre, and a much more local structure, and they're taking out regional management, because regional management acts as a buffer. I heard one CEO at the Microsoft conference actually say, the regional can say no, but they can't say yes. So stuff comes down from the top and they say no, and stuff comes up from the bottom, if I put it that way, and they say no, so they act as a brake. The other thing is that if you break out Brazil, Russia, India and China from the regional markets or regional subgroupings, you really solve the problem. Because the theory is, well, why do you treat Portugal like you would any of the BRICS? It makes no sense. Russia's 9 time zones, 7 time zones. Brazil is a couple 100 million people. India is 1.2 billion. China's 1.3 billion. It makes no sense. So the structure changes, and as a result of that change, you're going to get much more centralized. You're going to get sort of loosened type properties, but much more centralized, much more localized, with the stuff in the middle, I think, being taken out. We match our client structure. That would be great for us. We will save money as a result, and we will invest that money in better creative product, however you define it.
As you've adopted that model and evolved to it, what have been the challenges for you then as a leader?
We've had client leaders, so 41, our top 41 clients, it's 6 billion out of the 21 billion, 35,000 people. So you have the client leaders, which are the global piece. The local piece are the country managers, and I think we now have country managers or regional managers who are acting as country managers in 40 out of 110 countries, so we're over 40. So we haven't done it as much as we should do, but we're getting there. And it's the local, so they focus on getting the best people in the local market, working with the best clients, because we don't know all the clients obviously in the local market, and making the acquisitions. Now, how do I dislike this sort of, what's your leadership style? And, it is what it is. It's, there is a school of thought that you should be authentic. I hear that. It's very difficult. If somebody says you have to be authentic, you probably turn out to be not authentic. So you are what you are. We started this company from zero in a room not dissimilar to this size with 2 or 3 people 28 years ago, and we are where we are today. And I don't believe. Whenever anybody asks me my style, I say if my mother was still alive, I'd say ask my mother, or maybe she'll ask my wife, or ask people within the company, and you probably get the truth that way. So I don't believe in any sort of advice that I can pass on other than, sort of be yourself. And if you see, our strategy is very simple. It's new markets, new media, data, investment management, and horizontality, which is a terrible word like disintermediation for getting people to work together. It's as simple as that. And I think the answer probably is, you just have to live that strategy. And so everything you do, or most of the things you do, are actually seen to be implementing that strategy. Because you can have a great strategy and not implement it, and it's a disaster. You can be very good at implementation and not have a strategy, which probably is also wrong. You remember the business schools used to argue about whether strategy was important or implementation. The answer is both.
And you mentioned agility. The structure that you now have allows you to both empower.
Yeah, we suffer the same as big bureaucracies. The matrix gets more complex. We're very lucky because we've grown fast. I think our compound yesterday at the AGM, a compound growth rate of revenues and profits over 28 years is about 33% and 35%. Now the advantage of that is we haven't had time to establish bad habits. We sit in this tiny little building. It's not quite true because we've got a big building over there with some more people. But there's a method in this madness. This is meant to signal that, we're not some great bureaucracy moving pieces of paper around, although a lot of people inside the company believe that's what we do. But the fact that we've grown so quickly means that we haven't had a time to establish bad habits. Maybe in another 28 years we will have established bad habits. And you see this with big companies that have problems, that get smaller. They still have the habits they had when they were bigger, right? Whether it be corporate aircraft or whatever it happens to be. It's quite interesting. I think, we've grown so quickly by acquisition, it's true, as well as organic growth, that we haven't had time really yet to establish bad habits. Maybe my successor will be the one that establishes bad habits.
We're exploring this topic of trust in a digital world. What's your sense of how the importance of trust has evolved as the world's become more digitized, to use a word?
Well, I think because it's become much more fragmented, and there are things coming at you from all directions at 24/7, and there's so much more to choose from. One of the reasons we've become more important, particularly in the digital space, is it's so fragmented. It's sort of concentrating in the offline, but the online, it's crowdsourcing and open access, and we still haven't really accessed most of the world's population. That will come in time, and then you're really sort of enfranchising. It will be true democracy. It was a very interesting thing in our Twitter debate in Cannes last week. Dick Costello told the story of the mayor, who's mayor of 3,000 people in Sri Lanka, who's governing by Twitter in a sense, not totally, but he has a decision to make. Everybody's on Twitter, and he tweets, "I'm about to make this decision, or I want to do this. What do you think?" Now, the big issue is whether that's scalable or not. But it changes, it fragments. The thought that a government, maybe we should split everybody up into 3,000 people communities, and that's how the way we should govern. Who knows? And maybe we would really be democratic then. But the point is, it's changing the way, education is the same thing. I mean, online universities now are given the quality of online communication are much more effective than they used to be. So things like Coursera and everything else are really important. So in that world, brands, which is another word for trust, brands that you trust become more and more important. And companies that you trust become more and more important. And of course, you can't segment a message anymore. So, I can't segment for you a message. I mean, every time I say something, if anybody takes notice of what I said, I can't direct it to one community. It's to all these stakeholders and communities that we have to deal with. So in that world, I would say trust becomes more important. Empowerment, probably, I'm not sure, it's a way of describing it. I think organizations become more networked, clearly, as a result, more diffuse. So they're not pyramidic anymore. They're not like Alfred P. Sloan's General Motors of 1929. It's much flatter. There is no sort of much less command and control. And very interestingly, you hear this for people, for example, in the army. I heard the head of the US Armed Forces, when asked what was the difference between 2008 in Iraq, let's say, and today, was that even 6 or 7 years ago, battalion commanders would give instructions from the center. Now, people at the front line, because of the flow of information, are much more liable to make the decisions at the front line and then replay back what they've done rather than the other way around, because they're, it's a bit like salesmen now. It's in a company, they know what's going on competitively because of the network of technology and information, and they don't have to go up the line, up the pyramid, and for the message to come back down again as to what to do. They can make their decisions. So you say it's empowerment. I think it's decentralization, and it's this global local thing, which I think is really very interesting, because there are some properties that you should make global, right? You don't want needless duplication, particularly when companies like 3G and Valiant are popping up, with Buffett and 3G and Jorge Lehman and Valiant, and with their pedigree and McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. So these things are putting pressure on companies, so they have to be much more effective and efficient.
And it strikes me that military analogy is one that's easily applicable to a business. So you have capability in the front line, you now have data that gets them quickly, they're empowered to act, but there's speed across every dimension of that.
Yeah, yes. I mean, a lot of CEOs we have a number of political companies. One of our agencies worked for Santos and his successful re-election. One of our agencies worked for Modi in India. And the CEOs sort of they sort of get very excited when companies that have been successful politically, for example, Blue State Digital ran Obama's 2 social campaigns raising money online. And when they get enamored with it. But the point about the political side is not so much the pizzazz, and sizzle and sexiness around having a political advisor who's got somebody elected or claims to help somebody be elected president. It's more the techniques that they use and the sophistication of their techniques and the fact that the campaign is 24/7. And we all know that if you're running a company today, you can't take time off. There are no such things as holidays. I was speaking to the chairman of one company, who's non-executive chairman, who's going off on a sailing holiday for a week or so, and he's fully connected because he feels much more relaxed that he knows what's going on rather than he appears in port and finds out there's been something else that has happened. So, people talk about delegation and organizational structure. I disagree with that. I think that you have to be hands-on 24/7.
In a world that is hands-on and 24/7, and in a services industry when you're serving...
Well, particularly a service industry, because the thing that drove me nuts, you just reminded me, is I hate voicemail messages. Passionate. It's not that, if you have a decent message, but I remember, or the flipbacks on email, and the worst one ever was somebody inside our organization said, terribly sorry, can't respond, I'm on holiday at the bottom of an olive grove where the reception is poor. That did not go down well. And, in a professional service business, so-called, crises or opportunities or challenges do not pop out neatly and by the way, August is not the holiday month of many people in the world. It might be the holiday month of the British and the French and the Spanish and the Italians, maybe not the whole month, but but the fact is the rest of the world and the important parts of the world don't go on holiday. I mean, summer in Uruguay is December, around Christmas time. That's when they're taking their holiday. So it's not the same. So people forget that.
Are you building relationships differently and managing accounts differently as an organisation?
We're managing accounts differently, like the client leaders I mentioned. So because clients don't worry whether you work at J. Walter Thompson Company or Ogilvy or Young and Rubicam or Gray, they worry about whether you're good enough to do the job. So they want us to provide the best people. So that's the reason for that. So that's one level. We're operating very differently with clients. The second thing that drives that is they want integration. They want that. They want, in a world where growth is sub-trend, top line growth, GDP growth is muted and it's anemic growth, Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, there's a very great focus on cost, plus all the other things that are happening, procurement and finance becoming more powerful for that reason, 3G and Valiant, putting pressure on companies to be cost efficient. So all those things mean that integration is becoming more and more important. I had dinner with a client who said, we're using 22 of your companies. Well, we don't have 22 companies, basically. We have 15 verticals. But if that is the case, which in their minds it is, and obviously that's the perception is the reality, we have to coordinate that much more effectively, and that's what we're doing. So our work for our largest client, Ford, or our second largest, Unilever, or our third largest, Procter, is increasingly being zero-based because of effectiveness and efficiency, and also being integrated more. Now, but we don't do it well enough yet, but it's coming.
And rightly or wrongly, WPP was famed for a while of being able to have businesses that coexisted, that also competed.
Yeah, well, we kiss and punch.
As you go into the network, how do you handle that competitive?
If you have a conflict, you have to have client-facing organisations that are separate. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't have a back office that is consolidated. I mean, there may be, even in the case of the back office, sensitivities about information so you separate them. But by and large, everything client-facing can be done. We can't get away with what you get away with. We can't have conflicting clients in the same channel. We have to have separate. I mean, it's a very odd phenomenon. I mean, consultants and investment bankers, and indeed auditors, and maybe because there are so few of them, I'm just saying get away with it, it's the wrong way of putting it, but can do it. In fact, I remember McKinsey used to have a regular conference where on investment banking or commercial banking, and they used to invite all their commercial banking clients, investment clients, into the same room at the same time, and the lead partner on it would tell them what was going on in the industry, and we could never do that. We have to treat. So front office, but our model, which is multi-branded and grown by acquisition, is the most difficult model. It's no accident that Goldman and McKinsey are so good, because they've grown organically and they're uni-branded. And if I was writing the HBR article on this particular topic, the most difficult model is ours. Because again, you're going back to this issue of culture, or whether you believe in it or not. I mean, consolidating companies, integrating companies is the world's most difficult job. It's very easy buying them, but very difficult to consolidate them. And also organic growth is much stronger than growth by acquisition, but of course it takes a long time.
This conflict around serving clients in a similar sector, presumably that is made worse by digital, which is enabling sectors to compete.
No, actually, funny enough, I would say it's easier on digital because the spend is smaller. It hasn't got the degree of focus that it's had, because it tends to be more project-based rather than agency of record-based, and to a great extent, it's not necessarily a permanent relationship. It's a relationship which is more project-orientated. That is not necessarily the case. In other words, I would say that the examples of conflict where digital are involved are less complex and are numerically less than offline. That may be changing because online is becoming more and more important. And when online assumes 50% of the business, it may be just as intense as it is on the offline. But I would say currently not.
A lot of leaders are facing digital, many unsure as to what to do. If you had advice for leaders as their sectors, their organisations embrace digital, what would it be?
I hesitate to give anybody an advice, but I come back to those three things that I mentioned. It's attitudinal. You have to change people's attitude, particularly if you have a legacy business. You have to understand the importance of data. And I think you have to be prepared to experiment. You have to be prepared to break eggs. And when somebody says, well, you can't go off and do that because it's going to threaten, cannibalize your own business, stand by, because somebody else is going to do it to you. So I like that cannibal phrase that if you don't do it, if you don't eat your own children, somebody else will do that. I mean, a pretty horrible way to put it, but I think it has a lot of validity, and there's a lot of resistance to it because, and then you've got to lead. I mean, you've got to say this is where the direction we're going, and you'll have people inside the organisation saying, oh, that's going to cause us lots of problems. It's like integration 14 years ago. There were people running our verticals who didn't want to play together. Go back to your comment about competitive. Today, the people who lead our companies, because they've seen the benefits of working together, because they've won business, saved business, developed business by working together. Maybe it's because, I started this company with one other and there were two of us and we had nothing, so we valued anything, right? Whereas if you start with a company, JWT is 150 years old this year, despite my attempts to destroy it, it's managed to survive. If you're 150 years old or you work in a company that's 150 years old, you think you have a monopoly on wisdom. If you start with nothing, you have nothing, therefore you value something or anything.
And if you take the attitude point, the data point, the preparedness to experiment, do they need to follow a particular order? Is the attitudinal shift in a digital age the most important?
Attitude is the first thing. Data you probably could put third. Experiment, I would say probably the order of timing order, attitude, which then you can experiment, and then data is a part of the experiments that you're making.
Is there a fourth down the line for WPP?
Well, I'm sure there is, but I'm not bright enough to figure out what it is. I mean, those are three things that I think are very important. I mean, probably the fourth is, from our point of view, is to make sure that within 5 years it's almost half of the business.
Sir Martin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you.